All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Today's webinar is titled Accelerating Innovation, Effective Design Controls and Risk Management in MedTech. This webinar is presented by Rook Systems and QuickVault by Veeva Systems. Next slide, please. Today's webinar will begin with a brief introduction from our speakers. We'll then cover FDA and ISO design control guidelines, followed by a detailed overview of developing design controls. Our presenters will share industry insights on successfully implementing these controls, and then you'll get to see a live demo of QuickVault's latest software release. The presentation will end with a Q&A session. We do encourage you to send in questions at any point during the webinar, and we will address them throughout the presentation, and any remaining questions will be answered during the Q&A session. All right, Jeff, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great, thanks, Jacqueline. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Hau. I head up product for QuickVault. I've been at Veeva for over 3 years now, but I've been doing software product management for many years now. Prior to Veeva, I was part of Amazon. I've also been part of 2 different startups to help scale it to mid-sized companies. And really, I'm looking forward to demoing QuickVault today. Really excited to share with the group the upcoming new capabilities that we have within the system. I'll pass over to you, Axel.
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Axel Strombergsson. I'm the Vice President for QuickVault here at Veeva Systems. I've been with Veeva for about 2 years, and before that, I spent about 20 years in the MedTech industry. My background is in engineering, so I led R&D at a surgical device company for several years. So when it comes to today's topic of design controls and managing design control projects, that's something that I have quite a bit of first-hand experience with in different capacities. Later in my career, I changed focus more towards device commercialization operations. And in aggregate, over these 20 years, I've been directly involved in 6 startups in the MedTech space. I also spent a few years at the Vanderbilt University in Nashville at the tech transfer office there. So kind of being on the university side of medical device innovation. And lastly, over the past plus 10 years, I've also been a very active startup mentor within different type of organizations, such as accelerators and incubators, both here in the US and in Europe. Next slide, please. So Jeff and I, we work for Veeva Systems, and a quick overview who we are. We have been around for about 17 years, and we're now north of 7,000 employees. We're publicly traded at a 3 billion plus revenue. We started our journey many years ago in the pharmaceutical industry, where we have multiple solutions, cloud-based solutions to manage regulated processes within quality, clinical, commercial, and regulatory. 5 years ago, the company decided to take these enterprise solutions into the MedTech industry. And over these 5 years, we already have 19 out of the top 20 largest MedTech companies using our products. So if you're a startup here today, it's very likely that your future acquirer is using one of our products. A couple of things that we learned over these 5 years. First is we're going to talk about the industry best practices today for design control. So learning from these bigger companies and understanding how they operate has given us a very good insight in terms of what is industry best practices. Also, what we recognize, which is quite obvious, is that these enterprise solutions for these bigger companies that you see here, it's not really a fit for smaller MedTech companies, right? So what we have done as a company is for the past couple of years, developed a new solution that we call QuickVault. Next slide, please. And QuickVault is a new EQMS solution specifically built for smaller MedTech companies, and it has what you would expect when it comes to doc control and change control. We manage quality events and non-conformance, CAPAs, and complaints, training, and what we're going to talk about more today here and also demonstrate exactly the automation that we put in place for design controls and risk is really exciting in terms of when it comes to this topic of efficient innovation and bringing technologies to the markets quickly. We're tying all that together also with supplier management. As you know, when you develop a product, that's typically when you also select your suppliers. So it's really needed to have supplier management as part of design control. Next slide, please. On a high level, in terms of some other value proposition and differentiation with QuickVault, we cannot sometimes brand ourselves as the easy button for EQMS. And that is because that is our approach to make it very, very easy for smaller MedTech companies to get in compliance and get that efficiency within design and development. some things that are tied to that is that we are day one ready. So we can be that, we can get our customers in the first day because we do all the validation on our end. So there's no need for like weeks or months of implementation and validation on the customer side of things. Of course, compliant to all the different standards and regulations that you would expect in the MedTech industry. As a customer, up in the right-hand corner there, you can see we provide some resources. So going back to industry best practices, we do provide an industry best practice documentation package for free to our customers. So that's all the procedures, templates, forms to build that QMS that you need to get your organization where it needs to be. Something that I really like with Veeva is the middle right-hand side, a continuous improvement on our solutions across the board. Our software solutions are never stagnant, so we keep innovating. For QuickVault specifically, we have 3 to 4 releases per year, and each of those releases have added functionality and improvements to the software to make it more efficient and better, more value add basically to our customers over time. So we do that without changing the price. So it's like an appreciating asset for that. Lastly, we have taken a different approach when it comes to subscription models and contracting. You can get QuickVault on a month-to-month basis. And if you are a small startup, you can even pay with a credit card if that helps you to manage your cash flow. That's all I have for now. We're going to talk a bit more about QuickVault in a few minutes here, but with that, I'll pass it over to you, Cal.
Awesome. Thanks, Axel. I'm Kyle Rose, CEO and founder of Rook Quality Systems. My background, originally studied chemistry, worked in med device industry for a few different companies in quality and manufacturing, both for diagnostics and high volume contact lenses. Saw with my experience that there's a big range in quality compliance and efficiency, and thought it'd be a good area to consult with. So started Rook Quality Systems over 12 years ago now, and have started helping with start through early stage companies, and now we partner with big companies as well, supporting all activities of quality and regulatory for all types of med device companies. This includes design control, risk management, product development, validation support, internal audits, external audit support, all of these things. We also partner with a lot of incubators and accelerators, really helping with startup-friendly type businesses. High level on the webinar today, we will record this, we will provide slides and a recording to everybody that's signed up. So if you can't stay for the whole webinar, we'll provide that as well. Some of our clients, and background on Rook, so our team now, we have over 35 consultants. We have a global consulting team, which includes a branch in Europe and a branch in Taiwan, as well as the main branch in the US. We have 13 certified auditors that support internal audits and external audits for all of our clients. These are a list of some of our clients. So we support everything from diagnostics, wearables, monitoring products, standy products, permanent implants, sterile devices, a little bit of everything. So if you have a new product you're trying to get to market, you're unsure on the path or what you need to do for design and risk, that's really our expertise. So we'll get a team of consultants from Rook to help get your QMS, your design, your DHF, everything up and running. For today's webinar, we're talking specifically on design controls and design guidelines, specifically for FDA and ISO, how these should be implemented, what the key things to focus on with your early stage medical device company are, and how to properly implement these efficiently. One of the things that we get a lot of questions on when we're working with companies and startups is when to start this design control process. So with our work with very early stage companies, both in academic areas as well as early stage startups, we've shown over the past 12 years that it's never too early to start. If you start to build this foundation for design control, then you can really identify early on what you need to build with your device, how it's going to be tested, and what your path to market is. So the sooner you can start, even like on the back of a napkin, documenting some of these things for your design, your user needs, your design inputs, the better it'll be in the long run to give you a better idea of how you're going to test and commercialize this product. We did have a quick question come in relative to QMSR. So within this, you'll see all the actual sections from FDA and ISO highlighted that cover these sections of design control. This aligns directly with QMSR as well. So the QMSR is just merging the FDA QSR regulations with ISO 13485 regulations. So this presentation aligns with QMSR and the future FDA regulations. With the idea of design control, this is a really good graphic that we use with a lot of our clients. It shows kind of the workflow of developing your product. So the user needs will be your high level requirements, what your user needs. We want this device to be safe. We want it to work quickly. We want it to be something they can use, on their phone, if it's an app, whatever it might be. So having a high level generic needs that then tie to your design inputs. Design inputs will be your actual specifications as to how this will work. So these will be things you can test against. So if you say it needs to be small, you'll define the weight, the size, the portability of this product. If you say it needs to have a fast result in some sort of diagnostic, you'll say it needs to have a result in less than 10 minutes, less than 15 minutes, less than 5 minutes. So whatever your design input is, these kind of lead from your design, your user needs. You want to identify actual specifications that you can test against. The next phase in this design control process is your design output. So your design output is actually the evidence of the product you've created. So this will show how you're meeting your design input. So examples of design outputs would be drawings of your design, any material specifications, wireframes for your software, actual source code of your software, instructions for use, labeling, things like this are your design outputs. Any schematics for any electronic components, things like that would be considered design outputs. And then there's this verification loop that's testing your outputs against your inputs. So you built your first prototype devices. You say it needs to be less than 2 pounds and it needs to, fit in the user's hand. So you would weigh the device, you would measure the device, and that will be part of your verification testing. So there's this loop to show that specifications are defined and the outputs meet the specifications. Without proper definition of your specifications and design inputs, you can't move to the next phase of outputs and testing. So it's critical that you don't skip this step and get this set as you're going through the process. This verification loop is one phase of testing within the scope of design control. We also have validation, which is more on the clinical evidence side, that you built the product the users wanted and needed. So this is more around usability studies and actual clinical trials. We know that not all products require clinical trials to get through FDA, but it is something that companies do voluntarily. There's also more requirements in Europe now for ongoing clinical evidence. So the clinical validation is also going to be part of your post-market activities. If you are able to sell your device without a proactive clinical trial, you'll still have some clinical evidence once you're actually selling and marketing this product. Diving in a little deeper as to how you actually start this design control process. So that diagram we just showed is a kind of overview of the entire process. With this actual design, you would start with your design plan. So this is a high-level document that covers what you're going to build, what the timeline is for building this product, who's involved with the team, and where it's going to be developed and or manufactured. Also good to include some regulatory planning in this as well. So what the regulatory path is and things like that. This design plan is something that actually should be documented. So it's part of the requirements and should have a formal document. You can also include Gantt charts and things like that in this design plan, but it's actual living record that you'll update as you go through your design process. One of the things that auditors will look at if you are in the process of design is that the design plan is updated. So you might not be finished with your design if you're going through an FDA or ISO audit, but you still need to have this design plan current with your design activities at whatever stage you're at. Going back to the design inputs, so these are defined again both in FDA and ISO. So these are specific requirements for your product. So they should have specifications, they should be testable, they must address the needs of the doctor and patient, as well as high-level needs around manufacturing, packaging, labeling. All of these things should be captured in your design input. So it's not just the key features of your product that are different from similar products. You still need to cover all of the features of your product. This should also highlight certain testing. So if your device has to have electrical testing or sterility testing or biocompatibility testing, you should define those things in your design inputs as well. So defining that it meets the requirements of 60601 or of the 10993 for biocompatibility. All these things should be defined with your design inputs. We have some questions coming in. Well, none of those specific to what we're doing now, so we'll cover some of these at the end. Design outputs, so leading for design inputs to design outputs. Again, these should be connected and traceable in your design control information. So what we're going to see later from the Veeva, this information should all be traceable, and it's a requirement of ISO 13485 that your design inputs and outputs are traced together and then linked directly to your V&V. So the information shared from Veeva on the new design platform is really going to show how this aligns with ISO 13485 and FDA to make sure you're having traceability between your inputs and outputs. Your outputs would be things that you need to show that how to properly build and manufacture this product. So anything from drawings of your device, specifications for materials, any other components that you might be using. So any off-the-shelf components can be part of your design outputs, any wireframes, source codes, any of the things related to actual software that's being done or the firmware. All of these things would be considered design outputs for your new device design. Instructions for use and labeling, packaging, all of these things should have design inputs as well as design outputs. So you should make sure you have your design outputs as part of this in your design control matrix as part of the process of developing this product. We have seen products where they have kind of worked with a design firm and skipped straight to the outputs without properly designing their inputs. We think that's definitely a big gap and can lead to issues down the road. So definitely make sure that you define your design inputs early in the process, iterate on them as you go and as you do testing, and then finalize your design outputs throughout this process. Design review is also a key component of this design control process. So making sure your design is reviewed by this design review team during each stage of development. So some companies use a different phase approach. Some people will do design reviews as they've locked down the user needs and design inputs, or some people will do it more based on different components of their device. There's no real wrong way to do it. It's really just making sure that you're actually capturing your design review and documenting these properly. One of the requirements for ISO 13485 is having an independent reviewer review these design reviews. So making sure that you have somebody independent who's not directly working on this product development review this as well. Companies have used Rook as a resource to be this independent reviewer for their design reviews. You can also have somebody else who's not active with the project but part of your internal team conducting this as well. With your design reviews, best practice is to actually take meeting minutes and review everything that is being discussed during this design stage, and then capture this in your EQMS and sign off. With QuickVault, they'll also show their design review practice and how that works and aligns with the requirements as well. Design verification. So kind of the next step is you've built the device, you've done your design review, you have some prototypes developed. Now we need to go into the actual verification testing. Verification is the stage showing that your testing, your design outputs meet your design input. So was it developed and designed correctly to meet our inputs? So this is testing for specific requirements to make sure you're showing that the device and proving it works properly as intended. So this would be anything from your external testing, like I said, the 60601, the biocompatibility testing, your sterility testing, things like that will be part of your verification. In the event of a diagnostic or an LDT, all of your analytical testing would be considered part of your design verification. These must have formal protocols that are developed and written prior to implementing testing and need to be signed off with defined acceptance criteria before you start your testing. The results of the testing should be summarized, put in a report, and then you determine whether or not you pass or fail your verification testing. In some cases, it can be that some of this testing is done internally. So you can do testing as bench testing, internal testing, things like that. But it really depends on your internal development, how much manufacturing you're doing, and things like that. We do see a question around sample size verification. So you do want to have sample size justification in your test verification plans. So identifying based on a risk-based approach, how risky this specific verification is, leading to anything that could happen incorrectly with the device, and using that risk-based approach to determine your sample size of your verification protocol. So whether you test 5 devices or 500, that should come down to your risk analysis and what you're actually testing. If it's a catheter and you're doing some sort of balloon testing or burst testing, that's a high risk if this fails, right? So you don't have a higher sample size for these things. If they fail, could cause injuries to the end user. So taking a risk-based approach with your sample size is always the key to having a good sample size justification with your verification and validation protocols. Design validation, so kind of the next step along with V&V. So after you've done the initial verification, you want to move into the validation side. So this would include any of the usability or clinical testing that we discussed earlier. Similar to verification, you'll need formal protocols before you start this. These need to be approved and the endpoints defined before you start your validation testing. Validation can be clinical testing, like I said. It can be usability in a simulated use environment, or it can be actual users using the device for the first time. So any of these things can cover the scope of validation. It really depends on your product and your regulatory path on what is required before. If you are in the space of like a wearable device where you're measuring heart rate or respiration rate, any of these common metrics, you would have to do a clinical study and show this works in a real population and use that as part of your validation for your FDA submission. So making sure that you have this as part of your plan for V&V and you design your clinical trials appropriately is key to getting your product through the market and key to your design planning and getting your device through the FDA as quickly as possible. Design changes. So as you're going through the design process, both in the development phase, as well as after the design has been reviewed and frozen, you can have design changes. These design changes should be reviewed and approved and properly documented. The design change process has specific requirements around what should be reviewed and tested when you're making design changes, especially in the post-market phase. So once you've released your product and you're selling product, it's really key that you follow the requirements of FDA and ISO to make sure that it doesn't affect any regulatory, any verification or validation, any usability, things like that when you change your design. So before just jumping into a design change, it's really key to see what that design change might impact before you start moving a design change, because you might get very close to this process of completing a design change, then realize you have to complete a whole new 510K before you can release it, and that might delay the implementation of this design change. So make sure you review the scope of design change, what all needs to be done before you implement the design change. And that would be aligned with ISO and FDA regulations here as well. Design history file. So your design history file is kind of this encapsulation of all these design control documents, your design plan, your design review, inputs and outputs, your V&V, all of these things go in your design history file. Identifying your regulatory path. So this is part of the phase of identifying what you need to design for, how you're going to test it, and what the requirements are before you can start to sell your product. So high level for the FDA, and this is different in different markets around the world, but for the FDA, we have class 1, 2, and 3, class 1 being lowest risk, things like toothbrushes, some surgical masks, things like that. Class 2, higher risk. This is a traditional 510K requirement, contact lenses, some diagnostics, surgical gloves. A lot of these fall in this category. A lot of catheters, a lot of wearable products, a lot of SAMD, image analysis. All of these fall into class 2. And then class 3, higher risk, things like pacemakers, defibrillators, cochlear implants, permanent implant, heart, cardiac implants, things like that would fall into the class 3. So depending on your product, different requirements to get through FDA, different requirements for design control and testing, as well as potential clinical testing as well. So making sure you have a good path on what your product classification is when you start your design control process. With that, Rook Quality does regulatory assessments for all types of devices. So if you're unsure on your path, you can reach out to Rook and we'll get a quick regulatory assessment set up for your product. How to identify testing. So this is one of the key things as you're starting out your design control process is what's our regulatory and what testing do we need to do? So you want to know if there's going to be a 9-month shelf life test you have to do. You want to know that as soon as possible so you can get that started before you realize, oh, we're finished, but now we have to wait an additional 9 months before we can submit. So having this planning of what's going to take the longest and starting that sooner than later is always good to make sure you meet your timelines for submission. There are some differences between testing for hardware versus software. So hardware requires physical devices to be made, so it can take longer to get these manufactured, whereas software, you can test it much faster, make iterations to software, and test the new versions much quicker. With that being said, you still need to document properly any changes and testing done for any software devices. Internal bench testing, talked about this earlier. If you are doing testing internally, you still need to have defined protocols and testing documentation before you start testing. Pre-testing is fine, but once you get to actual verification testing that you're going to use in a submission, you know, make sure you have formal protocols and reports. This has been high level, covering all devices with software development specifically. There are some slight differences, whereas development can go much faster. The look and feel and safety and effectiveness of software can be changed much quicker with minor changes. So you got to make sure that you have a defined process for your software development, identifying your phases of development, sprints, what areas are being developed and how they're being tested, if it's more of an agile software development practice. High-level code requirements, architecture requirements for this, and then how you're going to implement the software, test it, and maintain it should be defined in your software development plans as well. Rook does have a full software consulting firm that helps all types of medical device software with their quality and regulatory documentation. Very much aligned with the user needs and design inputs that we talked about earlier. The user requirements and software requirement specifications are very similar and should be defined for each specific feature of your software. And then these will be tested against your software outputs or your design specifications. Things to take account for with your requirements for software would be performance and functionality, how you're going to implement and release this software, any cybersecurity requirements, usability, as well as maintenance. The FDA is very concerned about medical device cybersecurity currently, so make sure you have a good cybersecurity plan and testing for your device, and that's something that Rook can help with as well. V&V, so similar to what we talked about earlier, you still need to have formal documentation, whether that's test plan, test cases, or automated software to do your testing, but it needs to be documented as far as your testing plan. This can include unit testing, functional and regression testing, or a mix of all these. You need to establish entry and exit criteria, so your actual acceptance criteria for your test, and then how all this should be, what the testing environment is, and how this will be documented within the scope of your final test reports. So that was a quick overview on design control related to the regulations. I'm going to pass it over now to Axel to talk about a little of his experience with specific design control.
Thank you, Cal. Let me share my screen here to get started. All right, so I have about 10 minutes here, but I'm going to talk a little bit more of what Cal has just mentioned, but taking a slightly different approach to this in terms of looking at it, design controls from the view of a methodology, and then with a lens of how you can think about design controls to minimize setbacks during your design and development project, and thus achieving the speed to get to the market sooner rather than later. And to kind of go into back to kind of found it in the regulations and explain where I'm going from here. If you go to the FDA website and you look at design controls, this is basically what you're going to see. And if you haven't been here before, I suggest that you go there because it's just a good read to get the regulations and read them through. But what you are going to recognize as you read through these regulations is, first off, there's kind of broad strokes, right? So pretty high level, not super detailed in terms of what you need to do. And furthermore, on the FDA website, there's not really like a playbook or a clear like work instruction, like step by step, here's how you go through design controls to be compliant and then, have 510K submission success. And there are a couple of different reasons why that is the case. First off, like Cal showed here, there's a lot of different type of devices that are subject to design controls, everything from some class 1 devices that are subject to design control and all class 2 and class 3 devices. So if you kind of think about the vast variety of devices that are out there, would be hard for the FDA to kind of be super specific. That all being said, I mentioned industry best practices in the beginning of this webinar. Over the decades that industry had to follow design control for device and development, industry best practices has sort of been established, right? So there's a general consensus how you approach design controls to set yourself up for that project success. And a good way to explain that, to kind of talk about design controls as a methodology, is to actually compare it to project management. So you can kind of think about design controls as project management, sort of with a twist, right? And I think most of you are familiar to some extent with best practices for project management. And I have a screenshot here from Project Management Institute, which is one of the leading organizations in the world when it comes to establishing how you should execute on projects to set yourself up for success. And what's interesting with project management is like industry agnostic, right? Doesn't matter if you're going to build a new nuclear plant or a new piece of software for an iPhone. A project is a project, and how you approach a project to set you up for success is sort of universal. And some of those universal pieces are actually directly aligned in design controls. So that's some of the things that I'm going to talk about in terms of how then to achieve speed. So sort of the common denominator for projects in general is that you want to sort of minimize things that you didn't expect. You run into issues, delays, you miss things. You kind of want to have a pretty smooth path from when you start the project in A and you close out the project in B, and not end up with this rat's nest here that I have in the picture. So if you execute design controls and also project management in general, it will inherently bring you to the market faster and cheaper. And also, if you execute well on design controls, you will have a high level of submission success. So you're going to avoid documentation gaps. And I'm going to talk a little bit how documentation fits into execution on design controls. Because there are things that you need to do during this journey that then regulators would expect to see when it comes to data and documentation. But also one of the reasons that regulators want us to follow design controls in the industry is to not only ensure that the data that they can look at to give you thumbs up to start selling your device is also to reduce the risk for post-commercial issues, right? So any project that you rush through and you miss things and you slap band-aids on it, it's a risk that following the closure of the product that you have sustained issues with whatever it might be. And for medical devices, there is a risk that if you don't do this properly, that you're going to have failures in the field, and that can then cause harm to patients. So that's also sort of the foundation for why also regulators want us to do this, to make sure that the devices that we develop are safe and effective for their intended use. When it comes to the overlap between design controls and project management best practices, and Cal touched upon this already, is sort of like the up phase planning. So if you look at the figure to the right here, the number one up in the top of the green one, right, to kind of establish a robust foundation for planning in different ways, and I'll talk more about the core pieces of planning before you then head into project execution in your design and development project of a medical device, right? So really that's plan ahead before you then start executing. And as you execute on what Cal talked about, you know, creating design outputs and doing your DV&V, then review the results from your execution. And then if you need to iterate for whatever reason, if you're not according to plan, you then revise the plan. Also, like Kyle mentioned, that your development plan is a living document, or you continue if you're successful according to plan, right? And that is, if you think about it, is really, really similar to project management, right? You know, you start your project with ensuring that all stakeholders have buy-in, and you have listed everything out, your milestones and interconnectivity between activities and so on and so forth. So that's really the whole thing. What's in the center of all this is the red here in document, right? And that's sort of where the twist comes in. So when you go through a design and development project of a medical device, there are also certain requirements in terms of how you document the development, right? In terms of signing off on specifications, having approved protocols before you head into bench testing or validation testing, and also the reviews that Cal mentioned, what's referred to as design reviews, which is actually part of the regulation at certain milestones of your project to do formal design reviews. So that's how that sort of overlaps. To talk a little bit more in terms of like the foundation of proper planning to set you up for this project success with a, sorry, I missed one thing here. So, sorry, so if it's not documented, so this is sort of like the saying, right? People say like what the FDA is saying is that if it's not documented, it never happened. And that's really why it's so important to kind of document this in a proper manner as you move along. So say that you do a bench test and you just have pretty poor notes around how you executed that test and what the results were, and you then decide to have that in your 510K, that might be rejected, right? So that just kind of emphasizes the need for how you document this journey. Anyways, so to kind of set you up for this success on the project of designing and developing a medical device, there are three foundational things, and Cal touched upon this, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper here. The first one is the design and development plan, which is basically your project plan, right? And I have a screenshot here of a design and development plan template that we have at QuickVault that we provide to our customers. Rook has same type of template. So if you work with Rook, they also have this template. So going back to industry best practices, what a design plan looks like in the different sections therein, we have that developed here in this design plan. But basically, you build that out to have a robust project plan. Then Cal also talked about design inputs and risk assessment. Those are also two key things to really have built out properly to set you up for that success, right? So design inputs, as you mentioned, they're based off your user needs, basically your specifications for how your device needs to function for its intended use. And we'll show you how we can build these out in QuickVault to help you with that. And by the same token, risk assessment, so have, you know, early on, conduct a risk assessment to the best of your ability based on the knowledge that you have on your device and any type of prototyping that you have done thus far. But if you do this really well, in the beginning of a project to the best of your abilities, and also include cross-functional team, different stakeholders to chip into this planning, that's really the foundation to make sure that you move, when you move into design control, that sets you up for that success. So that all being said, no matter how well you plan, even like simple devices can feel kind of complex in a sense, because also like Cal mentioned, there's interconnectivity between different things, right? Your design inputs and your risks are linked together to make sure that you design a device that is not only perform as it should, but also safe for its intended use. So you can kind of end up with this sort of like a sense of a spaghetti chart. There's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of stakeholders involved, right? To combat this and really make sure that you operate efficiently, that's really where we always recommend that you should leverage modern software like QuickVault. So what we have today, and what we have done, and we're going to look at here today, is that we have automated a lot of these regulatory processes when it comes to managing a design and development project of a medical device. And what this does, in addition to, of course, increase efficiency and speed, is that it actually also reduces the need for a lot of prior experience and knowledge. Of course, you need to have some level of knowledge to know how to execute and be familiar with your procedures and regulations, but you don't have to have been in the medical device industry for 10 years and leading design and development projects. Automation in QuickVault reduces the need for that and makes it very simple, right? And in addition to that, it prepares and organizes your documents for regulatory submissions and helps you achieve this compliance. And as you are post-market and subject to audit, you can also then easily manage that audit in the future. So basically what we are going to look at here next when it comes to now building this foundation to set you up for design and development project success. So we had a development plan, and then we have the design inputs and the risks. Here's a screenshot of our design control matrix, and we have talked about the user needs that are broken down into your design requirements. They're called design inputs, and those are then linked to what Cal mentioned, design outputs. So you have the traceability between them. In addition, as you see up here, we have the risks, and this Jeff's going to walk you through all this. But you build out your risk assessment within QuickVault, and you can then automatically tie your risks directly into design inputs, such then when you design the device, that is all linked together. So you cannot take in the spaghetti chart that I showed you, make that very, very transparent and automatically interconnected between the key pieces of design controls. Something that we are first to launch in a system like this is built-in design reviews. So we have talked about that at certain milestones of your product, you need to execute on certain type of reviews per the regulations. So we built that into the process so you can launch design reviews within QuickVault. And by the same token, we also have risk reviews. So when you and your risk team are doing a risk assessment, you can actually launch risk reviews as part of the R&D. And as you are in commercial distribution and you have something happen, whether it's a complaint or a CAPA, you can actually run a risk review even when you're in commercial state to make sure that your risk assessment is still on par with it. And lastly, since you are leveraging QuickVault to manage your design and development project per design controls, you can also export these design files that you need for various type of submissions. So Cal mentioned the design history file, which is now on the QMSR design and development file, and other things will be organized within the system. But with that, I would like to hand it over to my colleague Jeff, so he can show you exactly what this looks like and how you set this up to really be efficient when it comes to design and development.
Great, thanks, Axel. Let's get my screen up here. All right. Okay, so I'm going to go through a demo of QuickVault. I'll kind of walking you through. What I'm going to first do is just go through a quick recap of some of the key capabilities within QuickVault. Just spend a minute or two on that one before diving into our new functionality around design controls and risk. So QuickVault itself, we've got really the core capabilities within the QMS, including documents, training, quality events, suppliers as well. And then, of course, we've got the new functionality coming through. We've got a great kind of self-serve help content within QuickVault, really easy access, step-by-step instructions to show how to do all the different actions, and also just introduction content to walk you through all the basics around QuickVault itself. Because at the end of the day, we know it can be a tricky topic, and we want to make sure you have all the tools necessary to help get you up to speed as quickly as possible. Jumping into QuickVault itself, I'll go through a quick couple demo pieces to show you. One is just from document creation. Document creation is super simple. If I go, for example, to create like an SOP here, sample SOP for today, we'll go create an SOP here. Let's say this is for QA. We'll go and pick a document here. I can just go pick a document right from my laptop here. And then we'll walk you through what we call a draft to approve process, which is a few quick steps of being able to start from a draft, options to do an informal review before you do the formal review for the document. We have all the different versions available stored within QuickVault itself, and then approvals themselves are part of living compliant electronic signatures. So just very quickly here, I'll show you what an approval looks like. Go through, let's say we'll set the effective date to maybe 2 weeks from now here. We'll go through, and then as an approver, you'd be notified via email as well as a task within QuickVault, and then you can just jump right in and provide your username and password as a way to do your electronic signature. And again, this is part of living compliant. Once you have the document, you can also download a copy of the document itself, a PDF rendition version of the document. And what we'll do for this type of document is we automatically generate the header, the footer, as well as the approvals right at the end for the document itself. Moving along from a training perspective, you can do training right from QuickVault itself. You can assign training for any approved documents straight within the document, like such. You can see it's a training, or you can take a look at training across the organization, see all the training from the document level, user level, and also assign curriculas, which is the ability to leverage your training matrix to pre-assign training and automate training assignments for all your team. Quality events perspective, we've got 4 key quality event processes within QuickVault. Quality issues, which you'll kind of also known as like non-conformance or deviations, complaints go here as well. We've got CAPAs, change control, and effectiveness check. And the workflow is a nice tailored workflow here. We've got separate fields for each of the individual processes. For quality issues here, it's a 3-step process where you can fill in all the content, include attachments. For example, if there's just photos or a report that you want to include for the issue that you ran into, this is an example of expired material, immediate actions taken, and you'll also be able to put in your risk root cause analysis, your direct cause, subtype, impact levels, recurring, yes or no, and so forth. And then you can go through an approval process similar to what I just showed you with the electronic signature. Similarly, we can link these records together. So jumping into a CAPA here, you can see CAPA is slightly different fields because each of our workflows are slightly different. And you've got a 5-step process here where you can directly assign training CAPA tasks for named individuals who'd be able to document and include all their documentation right within the CAPA. And then lastly, we've got suppliers that's coming up. Suppliers, the ability to just put in all your suppliers, be able to approve your suppliers through a similar workflow that you saw like quality issues, where you have a part 11 compliance and signature for approving suppliers, and you'll be able to generate a supplier list. So that is just a super quick overview of a lot of the other functionality within QuickVault, but what I want to spend most of my time today going through is our new medical device design controls and risk functionality. So what I'm going to walk through is just go through a high-level flow of creating a document. So we'll use a fictional example of a company that is in the business of making gloves. So I've got this company here. We're going to be making gloves here. So let's say we're going to be designing medical gloves. Myself, I'm going to be the quality manager here, the project owner. Let's skip the reference. And you'd be able to put in all your design controls from your user needs, design inputs, design outputs, verification, and validations. So you get the full traceability matrix right within QuickVault. So let's go through just an example here, create a couple of user needs. For gloves, of course, you need to have protection. They've got to be comfortable. And let's say they also have to be durable and so forth. You can keep on adding more user needs, but we'll stop here. Once you've got your high-level user needs, so the next thing you'd want to do is typically put in your design inputs. So these would be your more detailed, measurable product specifications. So in this case, let's say the design inputs, you've got one here, it's going to be resistant to liquids. And you can tie your inputs back to your user needs here. You can go through and say, hey, this one's tied back to the protection, just to link all the different records together. And similarly, you can link risks. We'll get to that in a minute to be able to link your risks to any of your design control elements. And as well, you can also link to related records. So if you had a report or specific files that you were in QuickVault, let's say I want to link a certain file together to any of my records here, they would also be linkable right within QuickVault itself. So let's just, for the demo, add a couple more design inputs here. Let's say this one is low permeability. And it's also important that when it's comfortable, it needs to be comfortable for at least 8 hours, a little bit more measurable. And a lot of these things, like, looks really simple here, but it's a huge amount of time savings compared to trying to manage it within spreadsheets. For those that have tried to navigate the linking of your design controls with each other, as well as with risk, that can be quite a bit of headache, especially when it comes to making changes and keeping things up to date. So let's say this is a good point where we've got enough of our user needs design inputs. I'm going to skip some of these other things. Oftentimes what you do near the beginning is also look at risks. Within risk, you can go in and put in all your risks. We follow the preliminary hazard analysis flow here, where you kind of pick your initial set of risk based on your ISO category. So for example, let's say potential risk with your gloves is maybe you can be contamination, or potentially maybe another risk for these gloves could be that they are just functionally not comfortable, right? And as a result, you might not be able to do the operation. And of course, once you've filled out all your initial high-level brainstorming risks, you can jump into the risks themselves and provide more detail. You can get into the risk evaluation piece of it, so specify the severity, probability based on your risk acceptability matrix, and then get your risk level, as well as document whether or not any risk controls are necessary. So risk controls, yes or no, put in your actual risk control plan, and upon completing certain risks, you have the option to put in your residual probability, severity, and actual impact level. Of course, with the risk, you can also link it back to your design control. So let's say this one here, this particular risk around protection, we want to tie it back to resistance and low permeability here. You can tie it back to your individual records, so you have that traceability there. So now let's say we're at a point where we've got all our initial sets of design controls, like your user needs, your requirements, as well as your initial sets of risks. I want to show you what design controls and design reviews look like. And Axel mentioned, we actually are able to do design reviews right within QuickVault itself, instead of having a separate, keeping a track separate. So for example, here I can jump into a design review. I can start a design review here. Let's just say this is our kickoff review that we're going to run through, specify maybe when we want to have it. You can specify all the different participants you want to include in the review itself, add other folks in here, and then you can define what the agenda will look like. So for this, we're going to go and review all our initial sets of user needs and design inputs that we had put together. Once you're actually doing the meeting, what you probably do is sit together, maybe in a call or in a meeting room. You start the review, have everyone present within the meeting, and then you go through each of the individual items one by one, so you can decide whether or not for each of the individual items, approve or reject. So let's say these three are okay, but we had an issue with potentially one of these design inputs. So you can go through. And along the way, you're actually able to document all your notes, your meeting minutes within the meeting itself, kind of right in the demo itself. So here you can go in, you can type in all your content. You can potentially include an attachment. Let's say we want to potentially include maybe just a report to include in your meeting minutes. Action items to be noted here as well. And then you can complete and go through the final closure once you actually completed the actual design review itself, which you pick specific individuals, whether or not your own team, independent reviewers, and so forth, and they use just like our electronic signature mechanism that we have in other places to approve it. And we also are able to generate a report for your design reviews. So I'm just going to give you an example of what this one might look like based on the we put together. This is a draft version because we hadn't approved it yet. And you can see all the content, any of the meeting minutes that we have put here together. So it's all prepared right within QuickVault itself. If we went to risks, it's going to be very similar with a risk review. Another risk review is kind of a newer concept that we've introduced that is immersive right within QuickVault, and it works the very same way as design reviews. So if you've got all your risks, let's say you've completed, they're all ready for review, you can go and you can start a new risk review. And just like your design reviews, you'll see the same sort of thing. Typo there. Pick all your risks here, and then you'd work through the process for all your individual risks, and you can go and improve it. So you have the documentation and audit that you've recorded your risk. And this is very valuable in a lot of places, maybe just your initial review. This might happen even after the fact, outside of design and development with post-commercial activities. If there's a customer complaint investigation, you can go and kick off a risk review and document it right within QuickVault itself. Too. Last thing I want to show you is being able to put in additional documents. So you've seen me put in design controls, risks, and documents right within QuickVault. You can go in and include any other documents that you've put into QuickVault that didn't fall into any of these categories. For example, if you had your let's say certain design plans that we put together. If there's additional risk assessments outside of the risk that we did, maybe it's an FMEA risk assessment, other documents can go in and include these as related documents for the specific product, and you can categorize it within QuickVault as well. So let's say you can categorize, let's say these two are our plans here, and then you're able to use your export to be able to generate essentially our design files. So the terminology is evolving with the QMSR. The name for DHF is now going to be design development file. Your DMR is going to be the medical device file. And so I'll just give you an example of being able to generate. This is just an example of this SOP. This is an example of a file that we would be able to generate of a design development file based on your record. So you'd have the individuals, you'd have any of your plans that you'd be putting in, your approved user needs, design input outputs, and so forth, any of the design reviews that you went through, design changes, design transfers. This is what an example file would look like that we'd auto-generate based off the data that you put into QuickVault itself. One of the neat things, because of this category, we can go and categorize your documents, all the key categories, so that when you build out this document, they're actually separated into unique sections, which is going to be a huge time frame than trying to manage it all on your own. So it's really being able to auto build out your own index file. And of course, if you want to do your own, you feel like, hey, the one that QuickVault didn't generate properly, or maybe there's specific sections you want to add, you can also use our export to download just the spreadsheet of all your design controls and risks that you can then use to, and related documents that you can then use to generate your own file if you that prefer. So that's the quick overview of a lot of the functionality that's coming up in QuickVault. For design and risk specifically, we're able to build out our design control matrix. We're able to layer on our product risk with our design controls. We were able to conduct a formal design review and a risk review, and we were able to generate the design development file and medical device file. Switching here, what I want to talk about as we wrap up is a package that we call a quick start package. And this is actually really cool. It kind of takes together both the software as well as the partnership side of things with both QuickVault as well as the Rook team, where you can get QuickVault itself and you can get support from the Rook team to be able to get yourself off and running. Because sometimes it's tricky. It's like, hey, here's software, I'm not sure what to do. Or you have consulting, but then they don't necessarily help you with well, which software, what do you need to get through. We actually work closely with Kyle and the rest of the team to put this package together, and they know our template. They know QuickVault really well to be able to just get everything up and running. You can get both a couple of users as well as a number of hours of support from Rook to get you up and running. And it's a really great package that you can potentially take a look at. And so I just want to leave this as a final note for the group. And before we move on to QA, I want to just put up a poll. And so really, we'd love to hear from you just in terms of what we'd like to hear next, because certainly the group here is really what helps us kind of drive forward. Just take a moment just to put select the category of topic that you want to hear interested, and we'll tailor a session for you next time, or maybe in our upcoming agenda. So switching over to QA, I know there's been a lot of questions coming up. If we haven't answered them already, then Kyle, Axel, or myself are happy to go through them.
Yeah, I think we answered a few just kind of through the chat. There were a few I think we can still address now. So I think one of the first ones that came through from Susmita, for LDT tests, how do we do the validation on clinical evidence? So yeah, typically with some sort of diagnostic test, you're doing clinical evidence where you're collecting a clinical sample and testing that with your LDT versus a known comparator or an already cleared product. So if it's another type of test, a lot of the COVID tests, you're doing your test versus a known PCR that's already been 510K or cleared by the FDA. So having some sort of comparator and over a range of different types of subject, age, gender, different things, your device performance against a already previously cleared FDA product. And then one more, I'll jump in now. Suresh had a question about do design and development stages differ with a SAMD product, and do minor software enhancements come under design changes? So design and development stages are still aligned with what we talked about as far as design control from FDA and ISO. With software devices, it can go much faster. It can be more of an agile development where it's just focused on one function of the software and you're doing the full loop of requirement definition, outputs, and testing, and then moving on to another module of the software, another feature. So it can be done in that situation. It really depends, but it does still follow the high-level model of design control. And then minor software changes under design, it really depends on what you're changing, right? So you would have a risk analysis process for each design change for your software that would define, does this affect any regulatory, any performance, any safety, any effectiveness of this software, or is it more a cosmetic thing that's making the logo bigger and a different color, right? So depending on that evaluation and risk analysis would determine how much you need to do with that design change, if testing is required, regulatory submission, any of that. So you'd have to go through that process with your design change. I see some Axel as well. Are there any more on the the QuickVault you guys wanted to discuss?
I've answered a bunch of them in writing while we were going here. I don't know if we have any outstanding questions.
I think that there's one more about the combination product.
Yeah,
that they
so
need to comply with both. I think that's risk management as a drug and a device. So from our experience, we more focus on the device side, but we do document design controls and risk management for the medical device function of the combination, but also the higher device together, the combination with the drug and the device and those risks as well. So best practice from what we've seen, and there are some differences with combos. Some go more through the drug side of the FDA, some go more through the device side, but you still need to document design and risk for the medical device as well as the full system for that combination product.
what else do we have outstanding? So June
And then-
asked if we can
Yeah.
add the Q&A to the shared resources. Do you know if we can do that, Jacqueline?
Yes,
the
we can do
Q&A.
that.
Awesome.
No problem.
And then the follow-up on the LDT for genetic test and classification. So that I'd have to look deeper into the actual LDT proposed rule. We are working closely with LDT companies already, and QuickVault and Rook will be partnering up on some LDT information coming up soon as well. So we can follow up with you directly after this to look into the classification of your specific LDT and how that'll fall under the new FDA rule. Awesome.
All right. Okay. Did we cover all the questions?
Yes, we plan to have a session on the LDT policy as well. So that'll be coming up later this fall. I think that's everything. So thanks everyone for joining. We have our contact info. We'll send recording and slides.
And if you want to learn more with whether what Rook can help you with or how QuickVault can support your organization, you can reach out to us. You have the emails in the slides, but also on our website. You can book a demo on quickvault.veeva.com if you want to learn more, take a deep dive. Or if you have any other questions, just reach out to us. If we didn't cover any questions, shoot us an email. Happy to help. Like I mentioned, I've been an active mentor in my spare time for a long time, so happy to support anybody that has any questions. All right, I guess, Jacqueline,
Yeah.
that's
All
a
right.
wrap.
Thank you for joining us today. All right, everyone, have a good day.